Hello, my name is Doug Dortch, minister at Captiva Chapel by the Sea. Thanks for joining me today as we consider a brief message on confessing what you want Jesus to do in your life. A message I hope will bring you some encouragement for your day. I shudder to tell you this when we haven't even gotten to Halloween, but you do know, don't you, that there's only 8 weeks or so left until Christmas. You don't want to think about it, but I guarantee you that your children and your grandchildren have Christmas Day circled on their calendars. And more likely than not, they've already been throwing you hints about what they want to see under the tree come Christmas morning. Truth be told, I never thought it would be a bad thing for people to tell me what they wanted for Christmas or for birthdays or for anniversaries or any such holidays. I've always had much more of a problem trying to figure out what somebody else wants. It's always been helpful for somebody just to tell me what it is that they want me to give them or what they want me to do for them. And evidently there were times when Jesus felt the same way. We see that truth today in the story that we find at the end of the 10th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. It's a very familiar story. It's the story of blind Bartimaeus. At first glance, the story comes to us in the form of a healing story, and those stories are very prevalent in Mark's account of the Jesus story. Someone has a problem. In this case, it's blind Bartimaeus, a person who has to beg for a living, given his condition. And then there is a factor that complicates the problem. In this instance, blind Bartimaeus tries to get the attention of Jesus, only to be shouted down by those who see Bartimaeus only as an embarrassing nuisance. And then, in all healing stories, Jesus gives a cure, which leads to some response to the miracle. And all of that is certainly present in this story. But the more I look at it, the more I see the story of Bartimaeus not as a healing story, but as a calling story. In other words, I see it as a story where someone is summoned to follow Jesus. For example, verse 49, in just that one verse, there are 3 times where the word call shows up. You need to pay attention anytime something happens in a series of 3. It means God's up to something remarkable, as in resurrection. Jesus stopped and said, "Call him," referring to Bartimaeus. So they, the disciples, called to the blind man, "Cheer up, get on your feet, he's calling you." So do you hear the emphasis on calling in this story? And then comes the question as Bartimaeus throws his cloak aside, jumps to his feet. Jesus asked Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" What do you want me to do for you? For the longest time I'd read this passage and wonder why Jesus would have asked Bartimaeus such a thing. After all, is it not obvious? Wouldn't a blind man want to be given his sight? What else would be possible than the opportunity for someone blind to see around him, to see ahead of him? But of course, there's much more under the surface of Jesus' question. There's the open door that Jesus provides Bartimaeus with a chance for Bartimaeus to expound upon his cry for mercy and how Jesus might work to deliver him from what surely must have been a most painful past. There's the chance Jesus gives Bartimaeus to pour out his soul over the rejection in his life that has caused him to be so persistent in seeking an audience with Jesus. There's the opportunity Jesus gives him to come to him with the confidence that Jesus can do in his life what Bartimaeus most desperately needs. And when Jesus called Bartimaeus to come to him, Bartimaeus was ready to respond to the call of Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" asked Jesus. And Bartimaeus replies, "Rabbi, I want to see." You read this story and it begins to dawn on you that Bartimaeus may have already seen a whole lot more than the rest of the crowd that had accompanied Jesus that day to the outskirts of Jericho, but they weren't able to go with him any farther. For example, consider the cry that Bartimaeus made to get the attention of Jesus. "Jesus, Son of David, Jesus, have mercy." The term Son of David was a term reserved for the Messiah, the promised one of God, whom the Jews believed God would send to usher in the kingdom in the last days. And in the Gospel of Mark, no one ever uses that phrase before Bartimaeus utters it here in this story. And as you read on in the Gospel of Mark, after Bartimaeus does so, you hear it again. When as Jesus enters Jerusalem to go to the cross, the crowd lines the streets leading into the city and cries out on that Palm Sunday, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David." So Bartimaeus sees already in a way that no one else does. And furthermore, you read the story and it becomes apparent to you that when Jesus summons Bartimaeus to come to him, Bartimaeus jumps to his feet and he does something else. He throws aside his cloak, which represents so much more than a way to cover his body. Think about it for a moment. As a beggar, Bartimaeus used his cloak as a way of holding on to the money that he received begging. So when Bartimaeus throws his cloak aside, I can only imagine how the money that he had collected went flying through the air. But money mattered not to Bartimaeus, not anymore. Because Bartimaeus saw how in coming to Jesus he could receive so much more than his money that he received from begging would ever be able to provide. And so Bartimaeus did what the rich young ruler could not do. You remember that story? Jesus invited him to sell all his possessions, give them to the poor, and follow him, but he couldn't leave his security, the security of his possessions, to be free enough to follow Jesus. But Bartimaeus, he was doing what in due time others would be doing and throwing their cloaks before Jesus on his way into Jerusalem on that Palm Sunday morning, singing, "Hosanna in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Yes, Bartimaeus saw so much more than most people in Jericho that day, even before Jesus honored his faith and gave him his sight. So, what is it that you have come to this place today wanting Jesus to do in your life? I trust that it's something that delivers you from a disappointing past, while at the same time, as it did with Bartimaeus, can connect you to a hopeful future. I trust it's something that will cause you to throw aside whatever has been your security, so that you might stand ready to receive what Jesus knows you need. I trust that it's something that will give healing to your heart and significance to your soul. I trust that it's something that will cause Jesus to see that you are, in fact, his disciples, and you are willing, as was Bartimaeus, to follow Jesus where others are not willing to go. You are willing to follow Jesus past the outskirts of town and all the way to the cross. In some way, If I've just described the beat of your heart, mercy for your past, bright hope for your tomorrow, then cheer up and get on your feet, because today Jesus is calling you. Thanks for listening today. Now you take your most pressing need to Jesus, who calls you to do so because he cares for you. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.